The desert sand burned through the soles of Elena Reyes' boots as she regained consciousness, her cracked lips tasting of blood and dust. 6 hours earlier, she had been the respected navigation specialist for the Desert Search and Rescue Team. Now, she lay abandoned in the Sonoran wilderness, her canteen emptied, her radio smashed, and the distant sound of her team's helicopter fading into the scorching blue sky. They had left her for dead, but they had underestimated the woman who could read the stars like others read street signs. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The merciless July sun hung like a molten coin in the cloudless Arizona sky as Elena Reyes slowly pushed herself up from the desert floor. At 34, her lean frame concealed the kind of physical and mental toughness that came from years of desert survival training and real-world rescue operations. Her olive-green rescue uniform was torn at the shoulder, and dried blood had formed a dark stain across her right sleeve. The wound beneath had stopped bleeding, but throbbed with each heartbeat, a painful reminder of the accident that had separated her from the team. Elena brushed sand from her face and carefully assessed her situation. Her backpack had been taken, along with her GPS, satellite phone, and most of her survival gear. All that remained were the items she'd kept in her pockets: a small compass with a cracked face, a folding knife, and the brass star chart that had belonged to her grandfather. The antique navigational tool had been a fixture of mockery among her tech-reliant colleagues, who considered celestial navigation an obsolete skill in the age of GPS satellites. "Looks like the stars are all I've got now," Elena muttered, her voice raspy from thirst. She squinted toward the horizon, identifying landmarks to orient herself. The distant silhouette of Sentinel Peak meant the nearest ranger station was approximately 15 miles northeast, a formidable journey in desert conditions with no water and limited daylight remaining. Elena had joined the Tucson Desert Search and Rescue Unit 3 years ago, bringing with her a decade of experience from the Coast Guard's Search and Rescue Division. Her transfer to TDSR had raised eyebrows from the start. The tight-knit rescue team, led by Director Marcus Blackwood, operated like a private club, more than a professional rescue organization. Elena's Coast Guard credentials, multiple survival certifications, and traditional navigation expertise should have made her a valuable addition to the team. Instead, her methods had been consistently dismissed, her warnings ignored, and her successes attributed to luck rather than skill. "We've got state-of-the-art GPS systems and satellite mapping," Blackwood had told her during her first week. "Nobody needs to navigate by the stars anymore, Reyes. This isn't the 1800s. The other team members had laughed, setting the tone for her tenure with the unit. Only Jake Pearson, the team's veteran medic, had shown any respect for her traditional skills, occasionally asking questions about techniques that had guided navigators for centuries before electronics existed. As she surveyed the barren landscape around her, Elena reflected on the events that had led to her abandonment. The team had been dispatched to rescue a family of hikers stranded in the Western Canyon area. Elena had studied the weather patterns and topographical maps the night before and warned Blackwood about a potential flash flood risk in the canyon they planned to use as an access point. "There's a storm system building north of here," she had explained, pointing to her annotated map. "If it releases, that canyon will funnel water directly toward our extraction point. We should consider the eastern approach instead." Blackwood had dismissed her concern with a wave of his hand. "The radar shows clear skies, Reyes. The tech doesn't lie." He tapped his tablet screen, displaying the weather radar. "Keep your folklore to yourself and stick to the mission parameters." The mission had proceeded according to Blackwood's plan, but Elena's prediction had proven accurate. A sudden downpour miles away had sent a wall of water rushing through the canyon just as they were extracting the stranded hikers. The team had barely escaped with their charges, and Blackwood's fury at being proven wrong had been palpable. During the chaotic extraction, Elena had been separated from the group while securing rescue equipment. She remembered calling for assistance over the radio, then a sharp pain as something, or someone, struck her from behind. She'd fallen, tumbling down a rocky slope before darkness claimed her. When she'd regained consciousness, the team was gone, and so was most of her gear. Now, as she took careful stock of her dire situation, Elena couldn't be certain whether she'd been deliberately abandoned or if the team genuinely believed she hadn't survived the fall. What she did know was that waiting for rescue wasn't an option. Her section leader, Tanner Reed, had made his feelings clear during yesterday's briefing. "If anyone gets separated," he'd said, looking directly at Elena, "standard protocol is to continue the mission. We don't risk more lives chasing after stragglers who can't keep up." Elena shivered despite the heat. Tanner had never hidden his resentment of her expertise or his close alliance with Blackwood. Between them, they controlled every aspect of the team's operations and her future with TDSR. Standing carefully to avoid dizziness, Elena removed her grandfather's brass star chart from her pocket. The precision instrument gleamed in the sunlight, its calibrated rings and constellation markers as accurate now as they had been when her grandfather had used it during his time as a Navy navigator. Elena had learned celestial navigation from him during long nights on her family's fishing boat, absorbing knowledge that stretched back through generations of navigators who had crossed oceans guided only by the stars. 15 miles, she whispered, calculating how far she could travel before nightfall. "Maybe 5 miles today if I pace myself. Then I'll have the stars." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Elena knew that her survival depended on more than just reaching the ranger station. She needed to document what had happened, whether accident or deliberate sabotage. For 3 years, she'd endured the dismissal of her traditional skills, watching as the team increasingly relied on technology that could fail precisely when it was most needed. If she survived this ordeal, something would have to change. With the sun still high overhead, Elena began her journey, moving at a steady pace designed to conserve energy in the punishing heat. Each step was a small victory against those who had left her behind, each mile a testament to the resilience that had carried her through challenges long before this one. As she walked, she developed a mental inventory of her situation and resources. Water was her most critical concern. Without her canteen or filtration system, she would need to find natural sources or rely on desert plants for moisture. Elena scanned the landscape for the telltale signs of barrel cacti or desert pockets where rainwater might collect. The region had experienced rainfall within the past week, which improved her chances of finding water caches and rock depressions if she knew where to look. Food was a secondary concern. She could survive several days without eating, though it would affect her energy levels and decision-making abilities. Her knowledge of edible desert plants would help extend her resources if necessary. Shelter would become important once the sun set and temperatures plummeted, a deadly feature of desert environments that claimed many lives. The dramatic temperature shift could induce hypothermia in survivors already weakened by daytime heat exposure. Navigation, at least, was an area where Elena felt confident despite her lack of modern equipment. The landscape itself offered numerous clues for those trained to read them. The growth patterns of certain plants indicated direction, the position of the sun provided time and orientation, and once night fell, the stars would offer a detailed map that had guided travelers for millennia. As she walked, Elena's mind returned to the navigational exercise Blackwood had forced the team to complete 3 months earlier. He had confiscated all electronic devices and challenged them to navigate a 5-mile course using only compasses and maps. Half the team had become hopelessly lost, while Elena had not only completed the course first but had identified 3 alternative routes back to base. Instead of recognizing her skill, Blackwood had accused her of cheating. "Nobody navigates that efficiently with just a compass," he'd said. "You must have had a backup GPS." The accusation had stung, but it had also revealed something important. Blackwood and most of the team didn't just prefer modern technology, they were dependent on it. Without their devices, they were vulnerable in ways Elena was not. By mid-afternoon, Elena had covered nearly 3 miles, her pace slowed by the need to conserve energy in the increasingly difficult terrain. Her thirst had become a constant companion, her mouth dry and tongue swollen. When she spotted the distinctive shape of a barrel cactus nestled between 2 rocky outcroppings, she approached it with cautious optimism. Using her knife, Elena carefully cut into the top of the cactus and hollowed out a small basin. Slowly, precious liquid began to collect in the depression. The water was bitter and would cause stomach discomfort, but it contained life-sustaining moisture she desperately needed. Elena used her cupped hands to drink the liquid slowly, forcing herself not to gulp despite her body's urgent demands. As she drank, Elena heard the distant sound of a helicopter. Her heart leaped before reason reasserted itself. The aircraft was moving away from her position, following the planned search grid that wouldn't include this area. Standard search protocols focused on the canyon where she'd last been seen, not the open desert where she now found herself. They're not looking for me here, she realized. Whether by accident or design, the team was searching in the wrong location. The thought sent a chill through her despite the blistering heat. If they had deliberately abandoned her, they might be going through the motions of a search without any intention of finding her. Elena removed her torn outer shirt and used it to create a head covering, leaving her in the moisture-wicking undershirt that offered some protection from the sun while allowing sweat to evaporate and cool her body. She fashioned a small pouch from part of the shirt fabric to carry water from the cactus, knowing she would need to ration it carefully. As the afternoon wore on, Elena established a rhythm, 20 minutes of walking followed by 5 minutes of rest. The technique had helped her survive previous desert expeditions, balancing the need to cover ground with the necessity of preventing heat exhaustion. During one rest period, she examined her compass with its cracked face. The needle still moved, but the damage made precise readings difficult. Elena smiled grimly. Once again, she would need to rely on the traditional skills her colleagues had mocked, skills that now represented her only chance of survival. By the time the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Elena had covered just over 5 miles. Her progress was slower than she'd hoped, but she had maintained a sustainable pace and managed her resources effectively. She found a suitable location for the night, a small rock formation that offered some protection from the wind and would retain heat as temperatures dropped. Using her knife and what sparse vegetation she could gather, Elena created a small fire pit. The flames would provide warmth through the night, signal potential rescuers, and offer some protection from desert predators. As she worked, she kept her movements deliberate and energy efficient, applying survival principles that had been ingrained through years of training and real-world experience. With the fire established, Elena settled against the rocks and waited for the stars to emerge. The transition from day to night in the desert was swift and dramatic. The scorching heat gave way to a bone-deep chill that made Elena grateful for the small fire crackling beside her. Above, the sky transformed into a vast canvas of stars, untainted by light pollution and stunningly clear in the dry desert air. Elena removed her grandfather's brass star chart and held it up against the night sky. The familiar constellations aligned perfectly with the instrument's calibrated markers, confirming what she already knew. Her position was approximately 10 miles southwest of the ranger station. The starlight reflecting off the polished brass reminded her of nights on her grandfather's boat, learning to identify the celestial bodies that had guided sailors for centuries. "You see, Elena," her grandfather had told her, "electronic devices can fail, batteries die, signals get lost. But the stars? They've been reliable navigators since the first humans looked up at the night sky." Those lessons had shaped Elena's approach to navigation and survival. While she appreciated modern technology's advantages, she had never allowed herself to become dependent on devices that could fail precisely when they were most needed. It was a philosophy that had put her at odds with Blackwood's leadership style from the beginning. Elena recalled their first major disagreement, just 2 months after she'd joined the team. They had been searching for a missing hiker when their GPS units had begun showing conflicting information due to unusual electromagnetic activity in the area. While the rest of the team had debated which device to trust, Elena had pulled out her topographical map and compass. "We're here," she'd said, pointing to their location. "The hiker's last known position was here. These ridge lines create a natural funnel effect, which means they most likely traveled in this direction when they became disoriented." Blackwood had dismissed her analysis. "We follow the GPS data, Reyes. That's protocol." The team had spent 6 additional hours searching the wrong area before finally finding the hiker less than a mile from where Elena had indicated. The incident report had credited persistent search efforts using advanced GPS tracking for the successful rescue, with no mention of Elena's alternative navigation method that had ultimately proven correct. As she stared up at the stars, Elena's determination hardened. If she survived this ordeal, when she survived it, something would have to change. The rescue team's increasing reliance on technology at the expense of fundamental skills was more than a professional disagreement. It was a potential threat to the lives they were responsible for saving. Elena checked her fire, adding a few more sticks to maintain the flames through the night. She arranged stones to reflect heat back toward her body, and settled into a position that would allow for some rest while remaining alert to her surroundings. Desert predators, coyotes, snakes, and scorpions were active at night, drawn to the warmth of human presence. As exhaustion began to claim her, Elena's thoughts turned to Jake Pearson, the team medic who had shown her respect when others hadn't. Unlike Blackwood and Tanner, Jake had recognized the value of combining traditional knowledge with modern techniques. He'd even asked Elena to teach him some basic celestial navigation, acknowledging that it could be useful if their equipment ever failed. "Do you think they'll look for me, Jake?" she whispered to the stars. "Or have they already written me off as a casualty?" Elena knew the official protocol. A team member missing in the field triggered an immediate search and rescue operation, with all available resources deployed until the person was found or officially declared lost. But she also knew that protocols could be manipulated by those determined to do so. A search conducted in the wrong location would satisfy the requirement on paper, while ensuring she wouldn't be found. The question that haunted her was why. Had her consistent challenges to Blackwood's leadership made her enough of a threat to warrant elimination? Or was there something more, something she had seen or heard that made her dangerous to someone on the team? Elena's mind returned to the conversation she'd overheard 3 days earlier between Blackwood and Tanner, their voices low but clear through the partially open door of the director's office. "The audit team arrives next Thursday," Blackwood had said. "We need to make sure all the equipment requisitions and mission logs are consistent." "What about the discrepancies in the Canyon Ridge operation?" Tanner had asked. Reyes was asking questions about the missing equipment. "Reyes won't be an issue after tomorrow's mission," Blackwood had replied. "Trust me on that." At the time, Elena had assumed they were planning to reassign her, or perhaps even terminate her position. The possibility that they had been discussing something more sinister hadn't occurred to her until now, lying injured and abandoned in the desert, with their helicopter deliberately searching the wrong area. The realization sent a surge of adrenaline through Elena's exhausted body. This wasn't just about surviving the desert and reaching the ranger station. She needed to document everything she knew about the Canyon Ridge operation, the missing equipment, and the conversation she'd overheard. If Blackwood and Tanner were involved in something illegal, perhaps selling or misappropriating rescue equipment, her survival represented a threat to them. With renewed purpose, Elena checked her fire one last time and closed her eyes, knowing she would need rest for the journey ahead. Tomorrow would bring another day of punishing heat and physical challenges. But now she was fighting for more than just her life. She was fighting for truth and accountability within a system that had been corrupted by the very people entrusted with saving lives. As she drifted towards sleep, Elena's hand tightened around her grandfather's brass star chart. The ancient tool represented everything she believed in: reliability, timeless wisdom, and the human capacity to navigate challenges using knowledge passed down through generations. In a world increasingly dependent on technology, she had maintained these traditional skills not out of stubbornness or nostalgia, but because she understood their enduring value. "The stars never fail you," her grandfather had told her. "People might. Technology certainly will. But the stars? They've been guiding travelers home for thousands of years." Tomorrow, those stars would guide Elena Reyes toward justice, one painful step at a time across the unforgiving desert. Elena woke before dawn, her body stiff from the cold night, an uncomfortable position against the rocks. The fire had burned down to embers, providing minimal warmth in the pre-dawn chill. She moved carefully, mindful of her injured shoulder and the effects of dehydration that had intensified overnight. The eastern horizon showed the first faint glow of approaching daylight, her cue to begin moving. Experienced desert survivors knew that the hours around dawn offered the most favorable conditions for travel, cool enough to prevent excessive perspiration and water loss, yet light enough to navigate safely across difficult terrain. Elena extinguished the remaining embers of her fire, erasing signs of her presence that might mislead any legitimate search efforts. Using her knife, she carefully harvested moisture from another barrel cactus, drinking just enough to address her most urgent thirst. The liquid was unpleasant but life-sustaining, and she collected additional water in her makeshift pouch for the journey ahead. As she prepared to depart, Elena paused to study the landscape in the growing light. The stars had confirmed her position overnight, and now she could identify distant landmarks that would guide her progress through the morning hours. A distinctive butte to the northeast, a saddle-shaped mountain pass beyond it, and the faint outline of communication towers that marked the vicinity of the ranger station. Elena set off at a measured pace, her boots crunching softly on the desert soil. Each step represented progress towards survival and justice, each mile a testament to the resilience that her colleagues had underestimated. As the sun climbed higher, transforming the cool morning into another scorching day, Elena maintained her focus on the immediate goal, covering as much ground as possible before the midday heat forced her to seek shelter. By mid-morning, she had traveled another 3 miles, bringing her total distance to approximately 8 miles from her starting point. The ranger station lay another 7 miles ahead, a distance that would typically represent a moderate hike under normal conditions, but constituted a significant challenge given her injuries, limited water, and the increasingly hostile environment. Elena paused in the shadow of a large boulder, conserving energy and minimizing her exposure to the sun. She examined her cracked compass again, comparing its reading to her position relative to the landmarks she'd identified at dawn. Despite the damage, the instrument provided enough information to confirm she was maintaining the correct bearing. As she rested, Elena heard the distant sound of a helicopter once again. This time, it appeared to be following a different search pattern, one that might eventually include her current position. Hope flared briefly before caution reasserted itself. If Blackwood was coordinating the search, this could be another performance designed to satisfy protocol without actually finding her. Elena considered creating a signal fire, then decided against it. If the search was legitimate, revealing her position could save her hours of difficult travel. But if Blackwood or Tanner was in that helicopter, a signal would alert them to the fact that she had survived and was making progress towards civilization, information they might use to ensure she never reached it. The helicopter eventually passed beyond hearing range without approaching her position, leaving Elena alone with the desert heat and her growing determination. She continued her journey, maintaining the disciplined pace that balanced progress against the need to conserve energy and water. By early afternoon, the temperature had climbed well above 100 degrees, turning the desert into a shimmering furnace that tested Elena's endurance with each step. She had covered another 2 miles, bringing her total distance to 10 miles from her starting point, and leaving approximately 5 miles to the ranger station. The landscape had begun to change subtly, transitioning from flat desert terrain to more varied topography with increased vegetation, a sign that she was approaching the foothills that surrounded the station. The additional cover offered better protection from the sun but also presented new challenges. More difficult walking surfaces, increased risk of encounters with wildlife, and more complex navigation requirements. Elena found a shaded area beneath a cluster of mesquite trees and paused to rest during the most intense heat of the day. As she sat with her back against a tree trunk, conserving her remaining energy and water, she reflected on what would happen if she reached the ranger station. Simply arriving alive would contradict whatever story Blackwood had constructed about her disappearance, but without evidence, it would be her word against his. And as director of the rescue unit, his account would likely prevail. She needed more than just survival. She needed proof of what had happened and why. Elena remembered the administrative investigation she'd initiated into the missing equipment from the Canyon Ridge operation. She had submitted the paperwork just days before this mission, requesting a formal audit of all equipment usage and expenditures over the past year. The form would be in her desk drawer at headquarters, possibly already discovered by Blackwood or Tanner. That investigation request might explain the urgency behind their actions. If they were indeed misappropriating equipment, perhaps selling it to private contractors or using it for unauthorized purposes, an audit would expose their activities. In that context, eliminating Elena before the audit team arrived made a certain kind of terrible sense. As the afternoon heat began to moderate slightly, Elena resumed her journey with renewed determination. She wasn't just fighting for her own survival now. She was fighting to expose corruption that potentially endangered every person who might need rescue services in this region. Each step brought her closer not just to safety, but to accountability for those who had betrayed their duty. The terrain grew increasingly challenging as Elena entered the foothills, requiring careful navigation around rocky outcroppings and through brushy washes that could disorient even experienced hikers. Here, her traditional navigation skills proved invaluable, allowing her to maintain her bearing despite the absence of clear sightlines to distant landmarks. By late afternoon, Elena had covered an additional 2 miles, leaving approximately 3 miles to the ranger station. Her water was nearly gone, her energy reserves dangerously depleted, but the end was finally within reach. If she maintained her current pace, she could reach the station shortly after nightfall, assuming no further complications arose. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Elena picked up her pace slightly, knowing that darkness would bring both advantages and challenges. The cooler temperatures would make travel more comfortable, but the difficult terrain would become more treacherous without daylight to reveal potential hazards. Just as she was calculating how much farther she could travel before needing to navigate by starlight, Elena heard a sound that made her blood run cold, the distinctive rumble of an approaching vehicle. She dropped to a crouch behind a large boulder, her heart pounding as she peered cautiously around its edge. A white SUV with the Desert Search and Rescue logo emblazoned on its side came into view, moving slowly along a dirt road about half a mile away. Through her squinted eyes, Elena could make out 2 figures in the front seats, and even at this distance, she recognized Tanner Reed's distinctive profile behind the wheel. They're sweeping the approaches to the ranger station, she realized. If they were indeed looking for her, not to rescue her but to ensure she never reached help, they would be monitoring all likely routes a survivor might take. The road they were traveling paralleled her intended path, and if she continued as planned, she would eventually need to cross it to reach the station. Elena faced a critical decision: continue toward the ranger station and risk encounter with those who had abandoned her, or alter her course to avoid detection, potentially adding miles to her journey and delaying her arrival until well after dark. Either choice carried significant risks, and with her resources nearly exhausted, the margin for error was vanishingly small. Drawing on her training and experience, Elena chose a third option. Instead of avoiding the road entirely or continuing directly toward the station, she would follow the road at a safe distance, using it as a guide while remaining concealed among the rocky terrain that flanked it. This approach would allow her to maintain the most direct route possible while minimizing the risk of detection. As the SUV continued its slow patrol, Elena began her careful parallel approach, using each boulder and patch of vegetation as cover. The technique required constant vigilance and frequent pauses to assess her surroundings, but it allowed her to make steady progress toward her destination while avoiding exposure. The sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the desert landscape and providing additional concealment as Elena continued her cautious advance. The SUV eventually turned around and headed back toward the station, but Elena maintained her careful approach, suspecting that Tanner and his companion would remain vigilant throughout the evening. By the time full darkness descended, Elena had covered another mile, leaving approximately 2 miles to the ranger station. The lights of the facility were now visible in the distance, beckoning with the promise of safety and assistance. But Elena knew that the final approach would be the most dangerous phase of her journey. She paused to rest and assess her situation. Her water was gone, her strength severely depleted, and her injured shoulder throbbed with each movement. But the night sky above was clear and brilliant with stars, offering the guidance she needed for the final leg of her journey. Elena removed her grandfather's brass star chart once more, confirming her position and the most direct route to the station. The ancient constellations aligned perfectly with the instrument's markers, providing navigation information more reliable than any GPS unit could offer in these conditions. "Almost there, Grandpa," she whispered, tracing the familiar patterns of stars with her finger. "Just like you taught me." With renewed determination, Elena continued toward the distant lights, moving with the careful precision of someone who understood that survival often depended on the final moments of an ordeal, when exhaustion and the prospect of imminent rescue could lead to fatal carelessness. As she drew closer to the ranger station, Elena began to formulate her plan for what would happen after she arrived. She couldn't simply walk up to the front door. If Blackwood or Tanner was present, they might intercept her before she could speak to anyone else. She needed to find a specific ranger, someone outside the TDSR command structure who would listen to her story and secure evidence before Blackwood could intervene. Elena remembered Ranger Martinez, the station supervisor who had always maintained a professional skepticism about Blackwood's leadership style. Martinez had been in search and rescue for over 20 years and had expressed concern about the team's increasing reliance on technology at the expense of traditional skills. If anyone would give Elena a fair hearing, it would be Martinez. With this goal in mind, Elena approached the station from the east, avoiding the main road and parking area where TDSR vehicles might be positioned. The facility was larger than most ranger stations, comprising several buildings arranged around a central courtyard with communication towers rising above them. Light spilled from windows, and Elena could see figures moving inside the main building. She circled the perimeter cautiously, staying within the shadows and searching for Martinez's distinctive red truck among the vehicles parked behind the station. When she spotted it, relief flooded through her. The station supervisor was present, offering her best chance at being heard. Elena approached the rear entrance, her legs trembling with exhaustion and her vision beginning to blur from dehydration and fatigue. She had covered 15 miles of desert terrain in punishing conditions, navigating by compass and stars when all her modern equipment had been taken from her. She had survived against the odds, guided by skills her colleagues had dismissed as obsolete and unnecessary. As she reached for the door handle, Elena heard familiar voices from inside. Blackwood and Tanner were in the building, likely spinning a story about her disappearance that absolved them of responsibility. Their presence complicated her approach but strengthened her resolve. Elena took a deep breath and opened the door, stepping into the brightly lit hallway. Her appearance, torn clothing, dried blood, sunburned skin, and eyes bright with determination, told the story of her ordeal more eloquently than words could. A young ranger exiting a side office stopped short at the sight of her, his expression shifting from surprise to concern. "I need to speak with Ranger Martinez immediately," Elena said, her voice raspy from thirst and exertion. "And I need to make sure Director Blackwood doesn't know I'm here until after we've spoken." The ranger hesitated only briefly, before nodding. "This way," he said, leading her toward a private office at the end of the hall. "Martinez is in a meeting, but is that meeting with Marcus Blackwood?" Quote, Elena interrupted. "Yes, but then it's even more important that I speak with them right now," Elena said firmly. The ranger studied her face for a moment, then nodded again. "Wait here," he said, stepping into the office and closing the door behind him. Elena leaned against the wall, gathering her remaining strength for the confrontation to come. After a moment, the door opened, and Ranger Martinez emerged, followed by the young ranger who had escorted her. "Reyes?" Martinez's expression registered shock as she took in Elena's condition. "We were told you were lost in a canyon flash flood." "I was left for dead in the desert," Elena corrected, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "And I navigated 15 miles using stars and a damaged compass to reach you before they could complete their cover-up." Martinez's expression hardened. "That's a serious accusation." "I have evidence," Elena replied, "and I'm ready to provide a full statement, but we need to secure it before Blackwood realizes I'm here." The station supervisor studied Elena's face for a long moment, assessing the truth of her words against her known character and reputation. Whatever Martinez saw there appeared to satisfy her requirements for action. "Davis," she said to the young ranger, "escort Ms. Reyes to the medical office. Have Dr. Sandoval document her injuries and condition immediately." "Full documentation, understood. Photos, medical assessment, the works." "Yes, ma'am," Davis replied. "And Davis," Martinez added, "not a word to anyone about her presence until I give the all-clear. Especially not to Director Blackwood or his team." As Davis led Elena toward the medical office, she heard Martinez speaking into her radio, requesting immediate security for the station and notifying regional headquarters of a potential criminal investigation. The professional efficiency of Martinez's response confirmed Elena's judgment. She had found an ally who understood the seriousness of the situation and would take appropriate action. In the medical office, Dr. Sandoval reacted with professional calm to Elena's appearance and brief explanation of her ordeal. He provided water, began treating her injuries, and documented everything meticulously, creating the official record that would form the foundation of any subsequent investigation. 15 miles through the desert with no water and a shoulder injury, the doctor commented as he cleaned the wound on her arm. That's remarkable survival work. I had good training, Elena replied, thinking of her grandfather and his insistence that she master traditional navigation skills alongside modern techniques. And a reliable guide. She patted the pocket where her brass star chart rested. As Dr. Sandoval continued his treatment, Elena heard raised voices from the direction of the main office. Blackwood had apparently been informed of her arrival and was reacting with predictable outrage. The sound brought a grim smile to Elena's face. The first step toward accountability had been taken, and there would be no going back now. I want to make a formal statement, she told the doctor, about what happened out there and why. Dr. Sandoval nodded, his expression serious. Ranger Martinez has already requested that a federal investigator be present for your statement. They should arrive within the hour. Elena leaned back on the examination table, allowing herself to finally relax slightly. She had survived the desert, navigating 15 miles using only the stars as her guide. Now she would navigate the equally challenging terrain of truth and justice, exposing those who had betrayed their duty and endangered lives for personal gain. As she closed her eyes briefly, Elena thought again of her grandfather and his unwavering belief in the value of traditional knowledge. The old ways endure for a reason, he had told her. They've been tested by time and challenge and have proven their worth. Never abandon them completely, no matter how shiny the new alternatives might be. That wisdom had saved her life in the desert. Now it would help reform a system that had lost its way, ensuring that those who depended on search and rescue services would be protected by professionals who valued all forms of knowledge, both ancient and modern, in their mission to save lives. Outside the window, the stars continued their eternal passage across the night sky, bearing witness to Elena's triumph over abandonment, betrayal, and the unforgiving desert that had nearly claimed her life. Those same stars would now light the path toward justice and institutional change, guided by a woman who had proven the enduring value of traditional navigation in a world increasingly dependent on technology that could fail precisely when it was most needed. The ranger station infirmary was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitoring equipment and the occasional squeak of rubber-soled shoes on the polished floor. Elena sat upright in the hospital bed, her bandaged shoulder throbbing less now thanks to the medication Dr. Sandoval had administered. Through the window, she could see the first light of dawn painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and amber, a beauty that seemed incongruous with the ordeal she had survived. Special Agent Daniela Cortez of the Department of the Interior's Investigative Unit sat across from Elena, her dark eyes alert despite the early hour. A digital recorder rested on the small table between them, capturing every word of Elena's formal statement. So after regaining consciousness, you determined you had been deliberately abandoned approximately 15 miles from the ranger station, Cortez summarized, consulting her notes. And you believe this was connected to questions you raised about missing equipment from the Canyon Ridge operation. Elena nodded, wincing slightly as the movement sent a twinge of pain through her injured shoulder. Director Blackwood and Tanner Reed were discussing an upcoming audit when I overheard them. Blackwood specifically said wouldn't be an issue after tomorrow's mission. And the equipment discrepancies, what exactly did you notice? 3 high-end satellite communications units valued at about $12,000 each were signed out for the Canyon Ridge operation, but never appeared in the field. When I asked about them, Blackwood said they were being serviced by the manufacturer, but when I called the company to verify, they had no record of receiving our units. Cortez made a note, her expression revealing nothing. What else? Specialized rescue harnesses, medical supplies, drone equipment, all signed out for operations but often missing in the field. Over the past year, I'd estimate about $200,000 worth of equipment that exists on paper but not in reality. And you submitted a formal request for an audit? 3 days before this mission. The paperwork should be in my desk at headquarters, unless they've already removed it. The agent nodded. We secured the office last night. Nothing will be removed or altered before our team completes a thorough examination. Elena felt a surge of relief. The evidence existed, and it was now protected. Her survival and testimony would ensure that Blackwood and his accomplices would face consequences for their actions, both the equipment theft and the attempted murder of a team member who had threatened to expose them. Ms. Reyes, Cortez continued, her tone softening slightly. "I need to ask about your journey across the desert. 15 miles with minimal equipment and an injury. That's remarkable. How did you manage it?" Elena reached for the brass star chart on the bedside table, her fingers tracing the familiar contours of the instrument that had guided her to safety. "My grandfather was a Navy navigator during a time when electronic equipment couldn't always be trusted. He taught me to navigate by the stars, not as a novelty but as an essential skill." She extended the star chart toward the agent, who examined it with careful interest. "This instrument allows you to identify key stars and constellations and use them to determine direction and position. Combined with knowledge of the terrain and basic survival skills, it's remarkably reliable." "And your team mocked this knowledge?" Cortez asked, returning the instrument. "They called it obsolete, unnecessarily traditional, a waste of time in the age of GPS and satellite phones." Elena smiled thinly. "Director Blackwood once called it my Girl Scout hobby during a briefing." "The same director who became lost during your training exercise when his GPS was confiscated." "The same one," Elena confirmed. "He couldn't navigate 5 miles with a compass and map. I navigated 15 with a damaged compass and this star chart." Agent Cortez nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the old ways prove their worth in ways the critics never anticipated. She closed her notebook and stood. "I'll need to speak with you again later, but this is an excellent start. In the meantime, try to rest. Dr. Sandoval says you're severely dehydrated and need time to recover." As the agent left, Elena leaned back against the pillows, her body finally acknowledging the full extent of its exhaustion. She had pushed herself beyond normal human limits during her desert journey, drawing on reserves of strength and determination she hadn't known she possessed. Now in the safety of the ranger station, the adrenaline that had sustained her was fading, leaving bone-deep fatigue in its wake. She closed her eyes, intending only to rest for a moment, but sleep claimed her immediately. Her dreams were filled with stars that shifted and moved, forming patterns that whispered guidance across vast expanses of sand and rock. When Elena woke hours later, the room was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. A figure sat in the chair beside her bed, and for a moment, disorientation made her tense with alarm. "Easy there," said a familiar voice. "It's just me." Jake Pearson, the team medic who had shown interest in her traditional navigation skills, leaned forward, his face etched with concern and relief. "How are you feeling?" Elena assessed her condition before answering. The pain in her shoulder had subsided to a dull ache, and the IV in her arm had replenished much of her lost fluid. "Better," she said finally. "What are you doing here, Jake? Making sure you're all right." He hesitated, then added, and apologizing for not realizing what was happening, "I should have seen it, Elena. The way they treated you, the missing equipment, the convenient accidents that kept happening around you. It was all there if I'd been paying attention." Elena studied his face, looking for signs of deception but finding only genuine remorse. "You weren't part of it." Jake shook his head emphatically. "No, I swear to you, Elena. I had no idea they were stealing equipment, and I certainly didn't know they planned to." He trailed off, unable to articulate the enormity of what Blackwood and Tanner had done. "Leave me to die in the desert," Elena finished for him. "You can say it, Jake. That's what happened." He nodded, his expression pained. "Blackwood told us you'd been caught in the flash flood. He said you'd been swept away, and no survivor could have made it out of that canyon alive. We searched for hours, but in completely the wrong area." "Convenient for them," Elena observed. "When I suggested we expand the search grid to include the eastern slopes, Tanner shut me down, said it would be a waste of resources." Jake ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "I should have pushed harder. I knew you were too skilled to be taken out by a flood you'd specifically warned us about." Elena considered his words, weighing them against her knowledge of Jake's character over the 3 years they'd worked together. He had never been openly hostile like Tanner, or dismissive like Blackwood. In fact, he'd been one of the few team members who had shown genuine interest in her traditional skills. "What's happening at headquarters?" she asked, deciding to reserve judgment about Jake's involvement until she had more information. "Chaos," he replied. "Federal agents everywhere, seizing documents and equipment. Blackwood and Tanner were arrested this morning. 3 other team members are being questioned, the ones who were part of Blackwood's inner circle. And the rest of you? We're cooperating with the investigation and trying to process what happened. Jake looked down at his hands. It's hard to accept that our leaders were not just corrupt, but willing to let a team member die to cover their tracks. Elena understood the disillusionment he was experiencing. Despite the friction she'd encountered, she had joined TDSR because she believed in its mission, saving lives in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. Discovering that the organization's leadership had betrayed that mission for financial gain was a devastating blow to everyone who had served under them with integrity. "What happens to the unit now?" she asked. "Regional Command is sending in an interim director while the investigation continues. Someone from the Federal Search and Rescue Training Center in Colorado." Jake hesitated, then added, "They've asked for recommendations about who should be part of the new leadership team. I put your name forward, Elena." She blinked in surprise. "Mine? After everything that happened?" "Because of everything that happened," Jake corrected. "You were right about the flood risk, right about the equipment issues, and you survived an ordeal that would have killed most people, using skills the rest of us dismissed as obsolete. If that doesn't qualify you for leadership, I don't know what does." Before Elena could respond, there was a knock at the door, and Dr. Sandoval entered, carrying a tablet with her medical charts. "Good afternoon, Ms. Reyes," he said warmly. "You're looking much better. How's the pain level?" "Manageable," Elena replied, shifting her focus to her recovery. Leadership positions and the future of TDSR were concerns for another day. Right now, her priority was regaining her strength and providing the authorities with all the information they needed to ensure Blackwood and his accomplices face justice. After checking her vital signs and examining her injured shoulder, Dr. Sandoval made some notes in her chart. "Your recovery is progressing well. If this continues, we can discharge you tomorrow, though you'll need to take it easy for a few weeks. That shoulder injury was significant, and your body is still recovering from severe dehydration and exposure." "When can I give my full statement to the investigators?" Elena asked. "Agent Cortez mentioned she'd like to continue your interview tomorrow morning if you're feeling up to it." The doctor gave her a measured look. "But don't push yourself too hard. What you've been through requires proper recovery time, both physically and mentally." After the doctor left, Jake stood to leave as well. "I should go. The interim director wants all remaining team members for a briefing at headquarters." He paused at the door. "Is there anything you need? Anything I can bring you?" Elena considered the question. "My journal from the top drawer of my desk, if the investigators will release it. And..." She hesitated. "Information about what exactly was happening with the missing equipment. I need to understand the full scope of what I stumbled into." Jake nodded. "I'll see what I can find out." "And Elena? What you did out there? Navigating 15 miles across the desert using only stars and a damaged compass? It's already becoming legendary. People are talking about it at every ranger station in the region." After he left, Elena turned her gaze to the window, where the late afternoon sun was painting the desert in shades of bronze and copper. The landscape that had nearly claimed her life now seemed different somehow. Not just a place of danger, but a proving ground, where she had demonstrated the value of skills many had dismissed as obsolete. Her grandfather's voice seemed to whisper in her memory. "The stars have guided travelers home for thousands of years, Elena. Technology changes, but the sky remains constant for those who know how to read it." That knowledge, passed down through generations of navigators, had saved her life when everything else was taken from her. Now it might help her rebuild a rescue organization that had lost its way, ensuring that those who ventured into the wilderness would have the best of both worlds: modern technology when it worked, and traditional skills when it didn't. The next morning, Elena woke feeling substantially stronger. The IV had been removed, and she was able to move around the room with only moderate discomfort from her healing shoulder. Dr. Sandoval had provided fresh clothing to replace her torn and blood-stained uniform, and she had managed a proper shower, small comforts that felt like extraordinary luxuries after her ordeal. Agent Cortez arrived promptly at 9, accompanied by a colleague who was introduced as a forensic accountant specializing in government procurement fraud. They set up recording equipment and spread several folders of documents on the small table in the corner of the infirmary room. "Ms. Reyes," Cortez began, "we've made significant progress in our investigation since we spoke yesterday. Based on documents seized from headquarters and testimony from other team members, we've confirmed your suspicions about misappropriated equipment." The forensic accountant, a precise man named Lowell, opened one of the folders. Director Blackwood and Operations Manager Reed established a pattern of ordering high-end equipment for the rescue unit, documenting its receipt, then selling it through intermediaries to private security firms and wealthy survivalists. The scheme has been operating for approximately 18 months and involves equipment valued at nearly $350,000. Elena absorbed this information, the amount significantly larger than she had estimated. And the rest of the team? 3 other members appear to have been active participants, Cortez replied. 2 more were aware of the scheme but not directly involved. The remaining team members, including Medic Pearson, show no evidence of knowledge or participation. Relief washed over Elena at the confirmation that Jake had been truthful about his ignorance of the corruption. Despite her suspicions, she had wanted to believe that at least some of her colleagues had maintained their integrity. "We've also recovered this," Cortez added, sliding a familiar document across the table. "Your request for an audit of equipment inventory and usage." It was found in Director Blackwood's desk, rather than in the normal administrative channels where it should have been filed. Elena recognized the form she had completed just days before her fateful mission, the document that had likely sealed her fate in Blackwood's eyes. He intercepted it to prevent it from reaching the regional office. "Exactly," Cortez confirmed. "And based on the timing, it appears to have been the catalyst for the attempt on your life." Blackwood and Reed realized that an official audit would expose their scheme, and you were the most immediate threat. The accountant cleared his throat. "There's more. The financial records indicate that the proceeds from these sales were distributed among the conspirators through a network of shell companies and personal accounts. Director Blackwood received approximately 40% of the proceeds, with the remainder divided among his accomplices according to their level of involvement." For the next 2 hours, Elena provided detailed information about her observations over the past year, specific equipment that had gone missing, conversations she had overheard, documentation she had reviewed that contained discrepancies. Each piece of information was noted, cross-referenced with already seized evidence, and incorporated into the growing case against Blackwood and his co-conspirators. "One last question for now," Agent Cortez said as they prepared to conclude the interview. "Your survival skills and navigation abilities clearly exceeded what Director Blackwood anticipated. In your opinion, why did he underestimate you so significantly?" Elena considered the question carefully. "I think it was a combination of factors. First, Blackwood fundamentally didn't value traditional skills. He saw them as obsolete curiosities rather than practical tools. Second, he dismissed my capabilities because I challenged his authority and methods. And finally," she added with a hint of weariness, "he may have underestimated me because I'm a woman in a field still dominated by men with traditional views about who belongs in wilderness rescue operations." Cortez nodded thoughtfully. "Your assessment aligns with statements from other team members. Several mentioned that Blackwood consistently downplayed your contributions and expertise, particularly your traditional navigation skills." She closed her notebook. Those same skills ultimately exposed his crimes and may well transform how rescue operations are conducted in this region. After the investigators departed, Elena was finally cleared to leave the infirmary. Dr. Sandoval provided discharge instructions and a prescription for pain medication, along with strict orders to avoid strenuous activity while her shoulder healed. "Ranger Martinez has arranged temporary accommodations for you at the station," he explained. "The investigators don't want you returning to your apartment alone until they've completed their security assessment." Elena hadn't considered that Blackwood's associates might target her again, but she recognized the precaution as sensible. "Thank you, Doctor, for everything." "Just doing my job," he replied with a smile. "Unlike some people around here." Outside the infirmary, Elena found Jake waiting to escort her to the ranger station's guest quarters. He carried a small duffel bag that he explained contained some of her personal items from her locker at headquarters, retrieved with the investigators' permission. "How was the briefing with the interim director?" she asked as they walked across the compound. "Illuminating," Jake replied. "Her name is Commander Laura Winters. 20 years with Mountain Rescue in Colorado before joining the federal training program. She's formidable." "In what way?" "Extremely competent. Zero tolerance for excuses or shortcuts." and very interested in your star navigation techniques." Jake glanced at her. "She asked specifically about your training and experience. I think she's considering you for a significant role in the restructured unit." Elena absorbed this information without comment. While part of her welcomed the potential opportunity to help rebuild TDSR with proper values and methods, another part questioned whether she wanted to remain with an organization that had nearly cost her life. Perhaps it was time to consider other options. Teaching navigation skills at the Federal Training Center, for instance, or joining a different unit with leadership that valued diverse approaches to wilderness survival. The guest quarters were simple but comfortable. A small bedroom with an attached bathroom, a kitchenette stocked with basic supplies, and a sitting area with a desk. Through the window, Elena could see the desert stretching toward the horizon, the landscape that had nearly claimed her life now bathed in the gentle light of late afternoon. "Commander Winters would like to meet with you tomorrow if you're feeling up to it," Jake said as he placed her duffel bag on the bed. "She's establishing a temporary command center here at the ranger station while headquarters is processed as a crime scene." Elena nodded. "I'll be ready." After Jake left, Elena unpacked the few items he had brought from her locker: a change of clothes, her backup phone charger, a small framed photo of her grandfather on his fishing boat, and, to her surprise and relief, her personal journal containing detailed notes about her observations of equipment discrepancies and other concerns about TDSR operations. She sat at the desk and opened the journal, reviewing entries that now read like warning signs pointing toward the corruption she had inadvertently uncovered. Her meticulous documentation of missing equipment, inconsistent mission reports, and Blackwood's increasingly hostile reactions to her questions created a timeline of a conspiracy that had grown bolder as it succeeded. The final entry, written the night before the fateful mission, was particularly poignant. "Tomorrow's canyon operation concerns me. Weather patterns indicate potential for flash flooding, but Blackwood dismissed my assessment without even reviewing the data." Tanner's reaction was more disturbing, almost pleased that my warning was being ignored. "Something isn't right with this team, and I need to determine whether these are merely personality conflicts or indications of more serious problems that could endanger lives." Elena closed the journal, a complex mix of emotions washing over her. Vindication that her concerns had been justified. Grief for the betrayal by people she had worked alongside for years. Anger at the attempt on her life. But also pride in her survival and determination to ensure that what had happened to her would lead to positive change within the rescue community. She moved to the window, gazing out at the desert as shadows lengthened across its surface. The same stars that had guided her to safety would soon appear above the horizon, unchanging and reliable in a way her former colleagues had not been. Those stars represented more than just navigation tools. They symbolized a connection to generations of knowledge that modern technology often overlooked but could never truly replace. As darkness began to fall, Elena removed her grandfather's brass star chart from her pocket and held it up against the deepening blue of the evening sky. The first bright stars were just becoming visible, aligning perfectly with the ancient instrument's markings, just as they had during her desperate journey across the desert. "You were right, Grandpa," she whispered. "Some knowledge never becomes obsolete. It just waits for the moment when it's needed most." The pattern of stars above the desert was the same one that had guided sailors across vast oceans, led travelers across trackless deserts, and oriented explorers in dense forests throughout human history. That continuity offered a profound comfort, a reminder that while technologies and organizations might fail, the fundamental skills of human survival endured. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: meetings with Commander Winters, ongoing investigations, decisions about her future with TDSR, or elsewhere. But tonight, Elena allowed herself to simply appreciate her survival and the vindication of knowledge that had been dismissed as outdated until it saved her life. In the soft darkness of her temporary quarters, she began to formulate ideas for how rescue operations could be improved by integrating traditional skills with modern technology, not as competing approaches but as complementary systems that provided redundancy and resilience in life-threatening situations. Perhaps her ordeal could serve as the catalyst for a new approach to wilderness rescue, one that valued both innovation and tradition. As she prepared for bed, Elena felt a profound shift in her perspective. The journey across the desert had changed her in ways that went beyond physical endurance. She had confronted betrayal, faced her own mortality, and emerged with a clearer understanding of her capabilities and purpose. The stars had guided her home in more ways than one, providing not just direction but clarity about the path forward. Outside her window, the constellation Orion rose above the eastern horizon, the ancient hunter taking his place in the night sky just as he had for countless generations of navigators before her. Elena smiled at the familiar pattern, a celestial friend that had accompanied her on the most challenging journey of her life. "Thank you," she whispered to the stars, gratitude flowing not just for her survival, but for the wisdom her grandfather had insisted she learn. Wisdom that had seemed quaint and unnecessary in a world of GPS and satellite communications, until the moment when everything modern was stripped away, leaving only the oldest and most reliable guides known to humanity. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter in her journey. But tonight, under the watchful eyes of the eternal stars, Elena Reyes allowed herself to rest, knowing that she had not only survived, but vindicated a tradition of knowledge that deserved its place alongside the technologies that had tried to replace it. Commander Laura Winters stood at the window of her temporary office, watching the desert sunrise with an appraising eye. At 52, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had spent decades in wilderness rescue operations. Her silver-streaked dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her weathered face bore the lines of someone who had made countless difficult decisions in life-or-death situations. When she turned to face Elena, her gray eyes were sharp and assessing. "Ms. Reyes," she said, extending a hand. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." Elena shook the commander's hand, noting the firm grip and calloused palm, signs of a leader who had never lost touch with the practical aspects of rescue work. "Thank you for making time, Commander." "Please, sit." Winters gestured to the chair across from her desk. "I've reviewed your service record with the Coast Guard and your 3 years with TDSR. Impressive credentials. Even more impressive survival skills." Elena settled into the chair, still moving carefully to protect her healing shoulder. "Thank you. I'm not one for small talk, Ms. Reyes, so I'll get to the point." Winters leaned forward, resting her forearms on the desk. The Desert Search and Rescue Unit has been compromised, not just by the criminal actions of its leadership, but by a culture that prioritized technology over comprehensive skill development and discouraged questioning established methods. Elena nodded, recognizing a blunt assessment that matched her own experience. "I've been tasked with rebuilding this unit from the ground up," Winters continued. "New leadership, new protocols, new training requirements. And I want you to play a central role in that reconstruction." The directness of the offer caught Elena by surprise. "In what capacity?" "Deputy Director for Training and Operations." Winters replied without hesitation. "With specific responsibility for developing an integrated curriculum that combines traditional navigation and survival skills with appropriate technology. Your experience in both areas makes you uniquely qualified." Elena processed the offer carefully. The position represented a significant promotion and an opportunity to implement the changes she had advocated for years. But it also meant remaining with an organization that held painful memories and potential lingering resentments. "I appreciate the offer, Commander," she said finally, "but I need to understand your vision for the rebuilt unit before I can commit to being part of it." Winters smiled, a brief expression that transformed her severe features. "Good answer. I'd be concerned if you jumped at the opportunity without asking questions." She opened a folder on her desk. "My vision is straightforward. A rescue unit that represents the best of both worlds, cutting-edge technology paired with time-tested traditional skills. Team members proficient in both, not divided into factions that value one approach over the other." She pushed a document across the desk. "This is my preliminary reorganization plan. The core principle is redundancy in critical systems, both technological and human. Every team member will be required to demonstrate proficiency in traditional navigation, field medicine, and survival techniques alongside mastery of modern equipment." Elena skimmed the document, noting with approval the emphasis on comprehensive training and the rejection of the hierarchy that had allowed Blackwood's corruption to flourish. "This is impressive. It addresses many of the structural problems I observed." "I thought it might," Winters replied. "I've been advocating for this integrated approach at the federal level for years. Your experience, particularly your survival journey, provides a compelling case study for why it's necessary." Elena looked up from the document. "You've been following my career?" "Since your Coast Guard days." Winters confirmed. Your paper on the integration of traditional celestial navigation with modern systems caught my attention. It aligned with my own experiences in mountain rescue, where technology often fails in extreme conditions. The revelation that her work had been recognized and valued by someone of Winters' stature was gratifying. Elena had published that paper 5 years ago, challenging the prevailing trend toward exclusive reliance on GPS and satellite communications in rescue operations. At the time, it had generated controversy within the rescue community, praised by veteran operators but dismissed by technology advocates as resistant to progress. What happened to you in the desert, Winters continued, tragically validates the concerns you raised in that paper. When technology fails or is deliberately removed, traditional skills become the difference between life and death. I want every member of this unit to understand that fundamental truth. Elena considered the commander's words and the opportunity before her. Working under Winters would be challenging but fulfilling. A chance to implement the changes she had advocated for years and to ensure that what happened to her would never happen to another team member. I accept the position, she said finally, with one condition. Winters raised an eyebrow. Which is? I want to establish a mandatory cross-training program that includes team members from other regions. What happened here isn't unique to TDSR. The over-reliance on technology is prevalent throughout the rescue community. If we're going to create meaningful change, it needs to extend beyond this unit. The commander nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. That aligns with my longer-term goals. I was planning to propose something similar once we had stabilized operations here, but there's no reason we can't begin developing the framework immediately. She extended her hand again. Welcome aboard, Deputy Director Reyes. As they shook hands, Elena felt a sense of purpose crystallizing within her. The ordeal she had survived would now serve as the foundation for transforming not just one rescue unit, but potentially the entire approach to wilderness search and rescue operations across the region and beyond. When do we start? She asked. We already have, Winters replied. I've scheduled a meeting with the remaining team members for tomorrow morning. It's time they understood the new direction and the expectations that come with it. The following morning, Elena entered the conference room at the ranger station with a mixture of apprehension and determination. It would be her first time facing the team members who had searched in the wrong area while she struggled across 15 miles of desert with minimal supplies and an injured shoulder. 7 people sat around the large table, their expressions ranging from curiosity to wariness. Jake Pearson offered a supportive smile, while others avoided direct eye contact, perhaps uncomfortable with the reminder of how close they had come to losing a colleague through their leader's criminal actions. Commander Winters stood at the head of the table, her posture commanding immediate attention. For those who haven't met me, I'm Commander Laura Winters. I've been appointed Interim Director of the Tucson Desert Search and Rescue Unit following the arrest of Director Blackwood and Operations Manager Reed. She gestured toward Elena. This is Elena Reyes, your new Deputy Director for Training and Operations. Most of you know her as a colleague. All of you should know her as someone whose traditional navigation skills enabled her to survive an ordeal that would have killed most rescue professionals. The announcement of Elena's promotion generated subtle reactions around the table, raised eyebrows, exchanged glances, and in Jake's case, a barely suppressed smile of approval. Let me be clear about the situation, Winters continued, her tone leaving no room for equivocation. This unit has been compromised at the highest levels. Beyond the criminal actions of your former leadership, there existed a culture that dismissed traditional skills, discouraged questioning established methods, and prioritized loyalty over competence. That ends today. She activated a wall display showing the reorganization plan Elena had reviewed the previous day. This is our path forward. Every team member will be required to demonstrate proficiency in both traditional and technological approaches to search and rescue. Those unwilling or unable to meet these new standards will be reassigned to other duties. A hand went up. Lisa Chen, one of the helicopter pilots. Commander, with respect, does this mean we're abandoning modern equipment in favor of old-school techniques? Quite the opposite, Elena responded, stepping forward. It means we're creating true redundancy in our capabilities. Modern technology is invaluable when it functions correctly, But when it fails, due to environmental conditions, equipment malfunction, or deliberate sabotage, traditional skills become essential. She activated her tablet, displaying a topographical map of the desert region where she had been abandoned. This is the area I traversed after regaining consciousness. No GPS, no radio, no modern survival equipment, just a damaged compass and a brass star chart my grandfather taught me to use. Elena traced her route across the map, explaining the navigational challenges she had encountered and the traditional techniques she had employed to overcome them. These skills aren't obsolete, they're foundational. They've guided travelers for thousands of years, and they guided me home when everything else was taken away. The room was silent as team members absorbed the implications of her journey. For some, it clearly represented a paradigm shift in how they viewed their own training and capabilities. Deputy Director Reyes will be developing a comprehensive training program that integrates these traditional skills with our existing technological resources, Winters explained. Beginning next week, each of you will undergo assessment to determine your current proficiency levels and identify areas for development. And if we don't measure up? Asked Frank Miller, a veteran team member who had always aligned himself with Blackwood's technology-first approach. Then you'll receive additional training until you do, Elena replied. This isn't about weeding people out, Frank. It's about ensuring that every member of this team has the skills necessary to survive and to save others in any conditions. The desert doesn't care about our preferences or comfort zones. Neither should we. The meeting continued for another hour, with Winters and Elena outlining the specific changes to operational protocols, reporting structures, and training requirements. Throughout the discussion, Elena observed the team's reactions, noting those who embraced the new direction and those who seemed resistant to change. As the meeting concluded, Winters addressed the team one final time. I understand this represents a significant shift in how this unit operates. Change is never easy, particularly in the aftermath of a betrayal by those you trusted. But I want each of you to consider what Deputy Director Reyes accomplished with minimal resources and traditional skills that many had dismissed as obsolete. Her journey isn't just a remarkable survival story, it's a template for the resilient, adaptable rescue unit we're building together. In the days that followed, Elena divided her time between continuing to assist with the investigation into Blackwood's corruption and developing the integrated training program that would transform the rescue unit. Her shoulder was healing well, though Dr. Sandoval insisted she continue to limit physical activity for at least another week. The brass star chart that had guided her across the desert now occupied a place of honor on her new office wall, alongside her Coast Guard commendations and search and rescue certifications. More than a memento, it served as a daily reminder of the enduring value of traditional knowledge in a world increasingly dependent on technology. One afternoon, as she was finalizing the curriculum for the navigation module of the training program, Jake Pearson appeared in her office doorway. "Got a minute?" Elena gestured to the chair across from her desk. "What's on your mind?" Jake settled into the seat, his expression serious. "I've been thinking about what you and Commander Winters said about redundancy in our capabilities. It made me realize how vulnerable I would have been in your situation, lost in the desert without modern equipment. Most people would have been," Elena replied. "That's why the training program emphasizes these skills so heavily." "I know, and I'm fully on board." He hesitated before continuing. "But I think there's something missing from the current plan. Something that your experience highlighted, but that we haven't directly addressed." Elena leaned forward, intrigued. "Go on." "The psychological component," Jake explained. "What you did wasn't just about technical navigation skills. It was about maintaining mental clarity under extreme stress after a traumatic event. You were betrayed by colleagues, injured, abandoned without resources, and yet you maintained the focus necessary to navigate 15 miles across hostile terrain. It was an insightful observation." Elena had been so focused on the technical aspects of her survival that she had given less attention to the psychological resilience that had enabled her to apply those skills effectively. "You're right," she acknowledged. "The mental aspect is critical. Panic or despair would have been fatal out there, regardless of my navigation abilities." "Exactly," Jake agreed. "And that's something we should incorporate into the training, psychological resilience and decision-making under extreme stress. As a medic, I've seen skilled professionals fall apart when conditions deteriorate beyond their expectations." Elena made a note on her tablet. "This is valuable input, Jake. I'd like you to develop a preliminary outline for a module on psychological resilience in survival situations." Your medical background gives you a unique perspective on the physiological aspects of stress response. He nodded, clearly pleased to contribute to the program's development. I'll have something for you by the end of the week. After Jake left, Elena reflected on how the team dynamics were evolving under the new leadership structure. The initial wariness had given way to cautious engagement, with most team members now actively contributing ideas for improving the unit's capabilities. Even Frank Miller, initially resistant to the emphasis on traditional skills, had begun practicing with maps and compass during his off-duty hours. The federal investigation into Blackwood's corruption was progressing rapidly, with additional evidence emerging daily. 3 team members had been formally charged as accomplices, while 2 others had negotiated cooperation agreements in exchange for reduced charges. The equipment theft had proven to be even more extensive than initially estimated, with nearly $500,000 worth of specialized gear diverted and sold over an 18-month period. Elena had provided additional testimony to Agent Cortez, clarifying details about the events leading up to her abandonment in the desert. The evidence strongly suggested that Blackwood and Tanner had deliberately orchestrated the accident that separated her from the team during the canyon rescue, intending for her to become a casualty of the flash flood they had dismissed as unlikely. The irony wasn't lost on Elena. Their disregard for her weather analysis had created the very conditions they attempted to use to eliminate her. Had they heeded her warning about the flood risk, they might have continued their criminal scheme undetected for months longer. As the sun began to set outside her office window, Elena found herself drawn once again to the view of the desert landscape. The terrain that had nearly claimed her life now appeared transformed in her perception, not just an unforgiving wilderness, but a proving ground where the value of traditional knowledge had been dramatically validated. Her grandfather's voice seemed to whisper from memory, "The old ways endure because they work, Elena. Not because they're perfect, but because they're reliable when everything else fails." That philosophy now formed the core of the training program she was developing. Not a rejection of modern technology, but an acknowledgement of its limitations and the need for redundant systems that included both traditional and contemporary approaches. 3 weeks after accepting the deputy director position, Elena led the first field training exercise under the new integrated protocol. The team assembled at dawn at the edge of the desert, equipped with both modern technology and traditional navigation tools. The exercise was designed to simulate equipment failure at multiple stages, requiring team members to transition seamlessly between technological and traditional methods. Today's scenario is straightforward, Elena explained to the assembled group. You'll be divided into 3 teams, each responsible for locating and retrieving a simulated casualty in different sectors of the training area. Each team will experience progressive technology failures that will require you to rely increasingly on traditional navigation and survival skills. She gestured toward the desert stretching before them. The conditions today are moderate, temperatures in the high 80s. Light wind, good visibility. But don't let that fool you. The desert remains an unforgiving environment that punishes complacency and rewards preparation. Elena assigned team leaders and distributed the initial coordinates for each simulated casualty. Remember, this isn't a competition between teams. It's a test of your adaptability and your ability to integrate different approaches to navigation and rescue. The real measure of success is whether you can complete your mission regardless of what resources are available to you. As the teams dispersed to begin the exercise, Commander Winters joined Elena at the observation point. They seem engaged, she noted, watching the teams check their equipment and review their assigned sectors. More than I expected, Elena agreed. Even the technology advocates are taking the traditional skills training seriously now. Nothing like a vivid example to change perspectives, Winters observed. Your journey across the desert provided that example in a way no theoretical argument could have. Elena nodded, recognizing the truth in the commander's assessment. Her ordeal had transformed an abstract debate about traditional versus modern approaches into a concrete demonstration of why both were necessary. Throughout the day, Elena monitored the teams, progress as they encountered the planned technology failures and adapted their strategies accordingly. Some transitions were smoother than others, but all 3 teams ultimately located their simulated casualties and developed effective extraction plans using the resources available to them. During the debriefing session, team members shared their experiences and the challenges they had faced when forced to abandon familiar technology for traditional methods. The discussion was thoughtful and substantive, with several people acknowledging how their perspectives had shifted during the exercise. "I've always relied on GPS for positioning," admitted Lisa Chen, the helicopter pilot who had questioned the emphasis on traditional skills during the initial meeting. "When that simulator failed, I felt completely disoriented for several minutes. If it had been a real emergency, those minutes could have cost lives." "That's exactly why we're implementing this integrated approach," Elena explained. "It's not about preferring one method over another. It's about having multiple pathways to accomplish the mission when conditions deteriorate." As the debriefing concluded, Elena felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The exercise had validated the training approach she had developed and demonstrated that team members were genuinely embracing the new philosophy. What had begun as a personal ordeal was evolving into a transformation that would ultimately save lives and create a more resilient rescue organization. Later that evening, Elena sat alone in her office, reviewing the assessment reports from the day's exercise. The feedback was predominantly positive, with clear indications that team members were internalizing the core principle of redundancy in critical systems and skills. A knock at her door interrupted her review. Commander Winters entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might need this," she said, placing 1 cup on Elena's desk. "It's been a long day." "Thank you," Elena replied, gratefully accepting the coffee. "I was just going through the assessments." "The results are encouraging." Winters nodded, taking a seat across from the desk. "I observed most of the exercise. Your training design was excellent, challenging without being demoralizing, revealing gaps in skills without creating unnecessary frustration." "That was the goal," Elena acknowledged. "We need to identify weaknesses without crushing confidence." "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you," Winters continued. "Regional Command is impressed with what we're building here. They're considering implementing similar integrated training programs across all desert rescue units in the Southwest." Elena looked up from her reports, surprised by this development. "Already?" "We've barely begun the transformation here. Your survival journey created a compelling narrative that resonates with leadership," Winters explained. "It's one thing to argue theoretically for the value of traditional skills. It's another to point to a concrete example of someone navigating 15 miles across the desert using only stars and a damaged compass after being betrayed by colleagues who dismissed those very skills." The commander sipped her coffee before continuing. "They're organizing a conference next month to discuss standardizing protocols across the region. They want you to deliver the keynote address, sharing your experience and how it shaped the training program we're implementing." The request represented an opportunity to influence search and rescue operations far beyond the Tucson unit, to create systemic change that could benefit both rescue professionals and those they serve throughout the Southwest. "I'll need to think about how to structure such a presentation," Elena said thoughtfully. "It's not just about my personal journey, but about the broader implications for how we approach training and operations." "Exactly," Winters agreed. "Your experience provides the emotional hook, but the real value lies in how we've translated that experience into a systematic approach to integrated skills development." As they discussed the potential structure of the keynote address, Elena reflected on how far she had come since regaining consciousness alone in the desert with only her grandfather's brass star chart to guide her home. What had begun as a desperate struggle for survival had evolved into an opportunity to reshape search and rescue operations across an entire region. The stars that had guided her across 15 miles of hostile terrain were now guiding something equally significant: a transformation in how rescue professionals prepared for the challenges of an unforgiving environment. Traditional wisdom and modern technology, working in harmony rather than opposition, creating resilience where vulnerability had once existed. Outside her office window, the first stars of evening appeared in the desert sky, the same eternal patterns that had shown her the way home in her darkest hour. Elena smiled at the sight, grateful for the knowledge her grandfather had insisted she learn, and for the opportunity to ensure that knowledge would continue to save lives long into the future. "The stars never fail you," he had told her. Now she would ensure that rescue professionals throughout the Southwest understood that enduring truth, not as a rejection of modern methods, but as an essential complement to them, creating the redundancy that could mean the difference between life and death when everything else failed. The Southwest Regional Search and Rescue Conference Center buzzed with anticipation as hundreds of rescue professionals from across 6 states filled the auditorium. The stage was set with simple, elegant lighting that highlighted a podium and, behind it, a large screen currently displaying the conference logo. A compass rose integrated with modern GPS coordinates, symbolizing the theme of the gathering, bridging traditional skills and modern technology in wilderness rescue. In the preparation room adjacent to the stage, Elena checked her appearance one final time in the mirror. 6 months had passed since her desperate journey across the desert, and the physical evidence of that ordeal had faded. Her shoulder had healed completely, though occasional twinges during changes in weather served as reminders of what she had endured. Her body had regained its strength through a careful rehabilitation program, and her eyes held the quiet confidence of someone who had faced death and emerged stronger for the experience. Commander Winters entered the room, impeccable in her formal uniform adorned with the insignia of decades of distinguished service. 5 minutes, she said. How are you feeling? Ready, Elena replied, smoothing the front of her dress uniform. The deputy director insignia gleamed on her collar, a visible symbol of how far she had come since that morning when she regained consciousness alone in the desert. You've earned this moment, Winters said, her typically stern expression softening. What you've accomplished in 6 months is remarkable. The Tucson unit has been completely transformed, and rescue teams across the region are already implementing elements of your integrated training program. Elena nodded, acknowledging the praise but also recognizing the collaborative nature of what they had built. We've had an exceptional team. Jake's psychological resilience module has become one of the most requested training components. True, Winters agreed, but it was your journey that provided the catalyst for change, and your leadership that turned that catalyst into a systematic transformation. A staff member appeared at the door. 2 minutes, Deputy Director Reyes. As Winters left to take her seat in the audience, Elena took a deep breath, centering herself for the address she was about to deliver. The keynote speech represented more than just a professional milestone. It was an opportunity to ensure that what had happened to her would ultimately save lives by changing how rescue professionals approach their mission. The conference director's voice echoed through the speakers as she was introduced. Our keynote speaker today is someone whose personal experience dramatically illustrates the critical importance of integrated skills in wilderness rescue. 6 months ago, she survived an extraordinary ordeal that would have claimed the lives of most experienced professionals. Today, she leads one of the most innovative training programs in the country. Please welcome Deputy Director Elena Reyes of the Tucson Desert Search and Rescue Unit. The applause was warm and expectant as Elena walked onto the stage, approaching the podium with measured steps. She surveyed the audience, hundreds of search and rescue professionals representing diverse specialties and regions, all united by their commitment to saving lives in challenging environments. Thank you for that kind introduction, Elena began, her voice clear and steady. I'm honored to address colleagues who understand the unique challenges we face in wilderness rescue operations, and the importance of being prepared for when everything goes wrong. She activated the presentation display, showing an aerial photograph of the desert region where her ordeal had begun. 6 months ago, I woke up here, in the Sonoran Desert, 15 miles from the nearest ranger station. My radio had been smashed, my water emptied, my GPS and satellite phone taken. All that remained were the items I carried in my pockets, a damaged compass, a folding knife, and this. Elena held up the brass star chart that had guided her to safety. The overhead camera captured the image, projecting it onto the large screen behind her, a simple, elegant instrument that represented generations of navigational knowledge. This star chart belonged to my grandfather, a Navy navigator who insisted I learn celestial navigation alongside modern methods. At the time, I humored him out of respect, never truly believing I would need these skills in an age of GPS and satellite communications. That changed when I found myself abandoned in the desert by colleagues who had systematically dismissed traditional skills as obsolete and unnecessary. For the next 20 minutes, Elena recounted her journey across the desert, not as a tale of personal heroism, but as a case study in the critical importance of maintaining traditional skills alongside technological proficiency. She described the physical challenges, the strategic decisions, and, most importantly, the navigation techniques that had guided her to safety when all modern tools were unavailable. I tell this story not to glorify traditional methods at the expense of modern technology, she emphasized. Both have their place in our operational toolkit. GPS systems, satellite communications, and advanced medical equipment save lives every day. But when technology fails, Through environmental conditions, equipment malfunction, or in my case, deliberate sabotage, traditional skills become the difference between life and death. Elena transitioned to discussing the transformation of the Tucson unit, explaining the integrated training program they had developed under Commander Winter's leadership. We've created a system that emphasizes true redundancy, not just in equipment but in human capabilities. Every team member is required to demonstrate proficiency in both traditional and technological approaches to navigation, communication, medical treatment, and survival. She displayed a series of slides showing the practical exercises they had developed to test and reinforce these integrated skills, scenarios where technology failed progressively, requiring seamless transition to traditional methods. The results have been remarkable, Elena continued. Team members who once relied exclusively on technology now navigate confidently using topographical maps and celestial references. Those who favored traditional methods have embraced the efficiency of modern systems when conditions permit their use. Most importantly, the entire unit has developed the adaptability to move between approaches as circumstances demand. Elena paused, letting the implications of this transformation sink in for her audience. What we've created in Tucson isn't just a training program. It's a fundamental shift in how we approach our mission. We've rejected the false dichotomy between traditional and modern methods, recognizing that true expertise lies in mastering both and knowing when to apply each. She advanced to the final portion of her presentation, addressing the broader implications for search and rescue operations throughout the region. The desert doesn't care about our preferences or our comfort zones. Neither do the mountains, the oceans, or any other environment where we operate. Nature demands respect for its power and recognition of our limitations, including the limitations of the technology we often take for granted. The audience was silent, fully engaged as Elena outlined specific recommendations for implementing integrated training across diverse rescue specialties. Her proposals were practical and backed by data from the Tucson unit's experience, demonstrating measurable improvements in mission success rates and team member capabilities. In conclusion, Elena said, her voice resonating with conviction, "What happened to me in the desert was the result of a systemic failure, a culture that had become dangerously dependent on technology and dismissive of traditional knowledge. The criminal actions of a few individuals created the immediate danger, but the vulnerability existed long before they exploited it." She held up the brass star chart once more. This instrument represents thousands of years of human ingenuity and observation, knowledge passed down through generations of navigators who understood that finding your way home often depends on the most fundamental skills. When we dismiss such knowledge as obsolete, we don't just disrespect our predecessors, we endanger ourselves and those we're committed to rescuing. Elena looked out at the audience, meeting the eyes of colleagues who shared her dedication to saving lives in challenging environments. "The stars that guided me across 15 miles of desert are the same stars that have guided travelers for millennia. They don't fail, they don't require batteries, and they can't be sabotaged." By integrating such reliable traditional methods with the power and efficiency of modern technology, we create rescue capabilities that are truly resilient, able to adapt to any condition and overcome any challenge. The applause that followed was immediate and sustained, the audience rising to their feet in recognition of both her personal journey and the compelling vision she had presented for the future of wilderness rescue operations. As Elena acknowledged the response with a modest nod, she caught sight of Commander Winters in the front row, the older woman's usually stoic expression transformed by unmistakable pride. The Q&A session that followed demonstrated the deep impact of Elena's presentation. Rescue professionals from diverse specialties and regions asked thoughtful questions about implementing integrated training in their specific contexts, addressing resistance to change within established teams, and developing assessment tools to measure proficiency in both traditional and modern skills. Elena answered each question with practical insights drawn from the Tucson unit's experience, emphasizing that the transformation wasn't without challenges, but that the results justified the effort. "We're not asking team members to become history professors," she explained in response to one question. "We're teaching specific, practical skills that have proven their worth in critical situations. The goal isn't to abandon technology, but to ensure we can function effectively when technology fails." After the formal session concluded, Elena found herself surrounded by colleagues eager to continue the conversation. Directors of rescue units from across the Southwest expressed interest in sending team members to observe Tucson's training program, while instructors from the National Training Center discussed potential curriculum modifications to incorporate stronger emphasis on traditional skills. As the crowd gradually dispersed, a tall, distinguished man with silver hair approached Elena. "Deputy Director Reyes," he said, extending his hand. "Admiral James Hargrove, retired. I served with your grandfather on the USS Constellation. He was the finest navigator I ever knew." Elena shook his hand, surprised and moved by the unexpected connection. "You knew my grandfather?" "Indeed I did," the Admiral confirmed. "When I heard you would be speaking today, I made a point of attending. Martin talked about you often, especially your natural aptitude for celestial navigation. He would be immensely proud of how you've honored his teachings." "Thank you," Elena replied, emotion tightening her throat. "His lessons saved my life." "And now they'll save many more," Hargrove observed. "What you're doing here, integrating traditional knowledge with modern methods, it's exactly what Martin advocated throughout his career. He understood that true resilience comes from maintaining fundamental skills even as we embrace new technologies." The Admiral glanced at the brass star chart Elena still held. "Is that his instrument?" "Yes," she confirmed. "I've carried it with me since he passed." "He showed me that very instrument once," Hargrove said with a smile of recognition. "Finest quality brass, precision calibrated at the Naval Observatory. Martin could determine his position within a quarter-mile using that chart. And a decent timepiece." "That's excellent news," Elena replied, gratified that the transformation they had initiated in Tucson would now extend far beyond their local unit. "There's more," Winters continued. "The criminal case against Blackwood and his accomplices has been resolved. All 5 have accepted plea agreements that include significant prison time and financial restitution. The prosecutors specifically cited your testimony and evidence as crucial to securing these outcomes." The news brought a sense of closure to a painful chapter. Elena had testified multiple times during the investigation and preliminary hearings, providing detailed accounts of the equipment discrepancies she had documented and the conversation she had overheard between Blackwood and Tanner discussing her removal. The evidence had been overwhelming, but hearing that justice had been formally served still provided significant relief. "What happens to the unit now?" Jake asked. "Will we continue under your interim leadership, Commander?" "That's actually the last piece of news I wanted to share," Winters replied. "Regional Command has removed the interim designation from my appointment. I'll be staying on as permanent director of the Tucson unit, assuming my deputy director is willing to continue our partnership." She looked to Elena with a raised eyebrow. "Absolutely," Elena confirmed without hesitation. Despite the national opportunities emerging from her keynote address, she remained committed to completing the transformation they had begun in Tucson. The unit represented a proving ground for the integrated approach, a place where theoretical principles were tested in practical operations daily. Later that night, alone in her hotel room, Elena stood at the window gazing up at the star-filled sky. The same constellations that had guided her across 15 miles of desert now seemed to affirm the path she had traveled since that desperate journey, from survival to leadership, from personal vindication to systemic transformation. She removed her grandfather's brass star chart from its protective case, holding it up against the night sky, just as she had done during her desert crossing. The familiar constellations aligned perfectly with the instrument's calibrated markers, demonstrating the enduring reliability of knowledge that had guided travelers for millennia. Elena thought about the journey ahead, co-chairing the National Task Force, continuing to develop the Tucson unit's integrated training program, and sharing her experience with rescue professionals across the country. What had begun as a desperate struggle for survival had evolved into an opportunity to reshape how wilderness rescue operations approach the fundamental challenge of their mission, saving lives in environments where both human capabilities and technological tools were pushed to their limits. The stars above seemed to whisper the wisdom her grandfather had insisted she learn. True resilience comes not from relying exclusively on either traditional methods or modern technology, but from mastering both and moving seamlessly between them as conditions demand. It was a lesson written in the desert sand with her own footprints, proven through personal suffering, and now being translated into training standards that would ultimately save countless lives. As she returned the star chart to its case, Elena felt a profound sense of purpose and completion. The journey that had begun with betrayal and abandonment had led to transformation and renewal, not just for her personally but for an entire approach to wilderness rescue. The stars that had guided her home were now guiding something equally significant, a fundamental shift in how rescue professionals prepared for the moments when everything familiar failed and only the most enduring skills remained. Outside her window, the constellation Orion stood watch over the desert landscape, just as it had during her darkest hours 6 months earlier. Elena smiled at the familiar pattern, grateful for the knowledge that had saved her life and for the opportunity to ensure that knowledge would continue to guide others home when all else failed. "Thank you, Grandpa," she whispered to the stars. "Your lessons saved more lives than you could have imagined." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.